Greetings everyone, today we're gonna be talking about Detron hand cannon, and its counterpart, Mara, Detron. Basically they are almost identical, since Mara version received only 2 buffs. First one is a clip size buff, which is definitely good. Second one is fire rate buff, that didn't go out so well, and I'll explain later why. So let's proceed right to the stats and quick comparison. Detron deals radiation damage by default, which has the main utilization versus alloy armor units. 10% base status chance seems quite mediocre, but you can work with that when modded up. However, crit parameters are basically nothing, since 2.5% crit chance with 1.5 crit multiplier will barely affect the final damage output. Projectiles spread is alright compared to the most shotgun type secondaries we currently have. And the fact that Detron doesn't have any damage fall off like most shotguns and a BRAC, makes it viable to use at range, as long as the spread will allow it hit the targets. Finally, a short reload time of 1.0 second is really great, since it allows quite consistent damage output. So now about differences. Mara Detron has bigger clip size of 8, compared to 5 for normal version, and boosted 4.2 fire rate over 3.3 for regular Detron. Clip size buff is a really good addition, since it basically gives you more shots before the reload, and therefore increases such value as sustained DPS. The fire rate is just where it needs to be, for original Detron, but for Mara Detron it becomes kind of excessive, since recoil starts kicking in more heavily. I mean, if you are using regular semi-auto clicks, you won't probably see that much difference in fire rate over regular Detron. But if you decide to utilize all available fire rate with full auto macros, you'll definitely notice heavier recoil. Here's quick demonstration for what I'm talking about. There won't be anything mechanics related, but the only thing I would like to mention is that Detron actually a projectile-based weapon, so the pellets do have a travel time, although it still feels like almost hit scan at the medium range. Alright, now we can move to the builds. This is going to be a quite expensive one, since it requires 6 formers. We will need 3 V, and 3 bar polarities here. The essential mods are pretty simple: Hornet Strike, Barrel Diffusion, Lethal Torrent, and Seeker that goes as utility mod while still remaining as essential, because piercing the walls and groups of enemies is always helpful. So now we have 4 slots left, and there's gonna be a bit of variety in elementals and setups, basically because there's no the only right way. As for status, I would say that having at least one 60% status mod will make it more or less reliable, and it's gonna be noted in the builds as well. Also, speaking of that excessive fire rate Mara Detron has, if you're willing to utilize all available fire rate at full auto mode, I do suggest you consider Steady Hands as another utility mod. It's a good decision to be able to deliver whole clip at full auto at the enemies, basically at any range Mara Detron can reach, rather than trying always to catch up with recoil. Here's a brief demonstration again. So even that Steady Hands will appear in the builds, I didn't put in under essentials, because it definitely remains just as an option. Good. Finally we can start with elementals. First we are going for Grineer. There will be 2 main options. First elemental setup is corrosive radiation and either cold or fire, that is focused around the ferrite armor units. Basically corrosive covers all spectrum of ferrite armor units, mainly heavy gunners. Some amount of innate radiation damage will try to help you with alloy units, and it doesn't really matter here, if you are going either with cold or fire, because all the damage bonus they give will be heavily mitigated by armor at higher levels, so it's a matter of a small percent of difference in final damage. So here you will need convulsion with pathogen rounds for corrosive first, and for instance I'm going with cold by equipping frostbite. Of course if your choice is fire, feel free to go for heated charge or primed heated charge for heat damage. For the last slot we can utilize steady hands, otherwise, expel Grineer will be an excellent choice to boost every presented damage type even higher. The second option goes around alloy armor heavies, mainly bombards and napalms, so we will need radiation and viral here. Ferrite armor units remain sort of uncovered here, so everything you can rely on is those handy viral procs that will help you get them down faster. Anyway, equip convulsion with heated charge, or primed heated charge to add radiation damage to a base one, and put pathogen rounds with frostbite for viral damage. Right, there's no place for anything else, but this setup won't be able to complete otherwise. The Corpus setup will be pretty standard and simple, magnetic and toxin. I guess you know how it works already. Magnetic covers both shield and proto-shield. Toxin will be able to bypass shields for some additional damage by the time shields are being depleted. And while innate radiation have minus 25% damage penalty on shield, it does additional 25% to robotic health, so once the shields will be depleted, it is going to help you with those mowers and ospreys somehow as well. Therefore, equip convulsion with frostbite for magnetic damage and add pathogen rounds for toxin damage. For the last remaining slot you can again utilize steady hands, otherwise feel free to go with expel Corpus for further damage boost. Next ones in line are Infested. Even that some heavies such as brood mothers and boilers are not presented in some missions through the star chart, since the only fossilized type enemies out there are ancients and mutalist mowers. Eximus counterparts of fossilized enemies still have way more health than any light infested Eximus unit will. Assuming we can disregard all the trash enemies that will die anyway, we're focusing around fossilized health type, since it goes for the missions where all spectrum of infested heavies is present, so it's gonna be corrosive and blast setup. Thus we need convulsion with pathogen rounds for corrosive damage, and heated charge or primed heated charge, combined with deep freeze for blast damage. Note that I didn't use any status mods because both corrosive and blast procs are quite pointless here, since corrosive proc does nothing to infested, and blast proc is just unnecessary when you have any sort of crowd control. That's why I choose pure 90% damage elementals. Simple as that. And I don't really mention innate radiation damage while it's definitely here, because it's heavily resisted by most infested defense types anyway. And the last one is corrupted. Pretty much it's the same setup as the first one I suggested for Grineer. Either corrosive and cold or corrosive and fire setup, with the only exception that if you skip steady hands for more damage, this time we don't have an expel mod, so just boost that corrosive even further with pistol pestilence. And frostbite we used in Grineer setup can be switched for deep freeze, since we have at least one status mod now, just like I mentioned at the essentials part. Again, if your choice is fire over cold, just switch cold damage mods with heated or primed heated charge, that's it. That's all for the builds, so let's summarize everything we talked about somehow. Even that I treat Detron as an almost perfect example of what a strong weapon should be, without being no brain one or just overpowered. I wish that Detron stats could be just a bit more substantial, like, you know, 5% more status here, a little bit of crits here, and we're done. There's no even need to overbuff it. Even Mara version is more a cosmetic upgrade, since the only valuable change is a clip size buff. I just can't wrap my head around giving it more fire rate. Again, even 5 more base damage, 5% status or 5% more crits would come out more handy, rather than bringing such an unwanted problem as more recoil. I tend to think that when it comes to weapon upgrades, changes should not be limited to only focusing on buffs such as simply more of something, especially when there's a plenty of weapons that have weaknesses in their secondary stats, such as reload time, ammo consumption, recoil. At the very least, Upgrades should weaken some of the weapon's imperfect characteristics if not eliminate them completely. Omitting this usual statement of balancing problems, Detron is still a very solid choice amongst both primaries and secondaries, especially if you are into shotguns. Anyway, if you're willing to try it out, I wish you to enjoy Detron as much as I do. That's all for now, so if you find this review useful, please subscribe for more and thanks for watching.